Was Charlie Kirk a good man or a bad man? Was he a hero or a villain? Well, sometimes the best way to find out is pull back the curtain and learn from somebody who was with him personally, and that's what we're going to get to do today. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to this bonus edition of Creating the Future with me, Dr. Brent Simpson. And this is a bonus edition. As you probably know, we air every Thursday night. But with everything happening in the world right now, I wanted to give you an extra bonus edition tonight as we talk about Charlie Kirk and his life. Now, I know right now we live in a political world where there are streams running two different directions and they want to take you different directions. And if you're not careful, as Christians, you will go to those different directions. You'll jump in one stream and before you know it, you are gone. In the theater of my mind, I think of Ada and I were just in Hawaii, and while we were there, we did tubing through some ancient, or not ancient, but very old ditches that were put in for irrigation, over 100 years ago. And there were parts of those ditches that were only maybe 4 or 5 feet wide, and you would fly down them in your inner tube really, really quickly. It's a lot of fun. But I think politically, the same kind of thing happens sometimes, that we don't know what to think about this or that. And so we fall into a ditch, and before you know it, you are racing towards the end, right? Before you know it, you're probably going further than you really wanted to go, or at least further than the truth may be able to take you. And we want to make sure in this moment with Charlie Kirk, we don't just turn it into a political moment. It's not that, but yet politics will want to make it for that for you. I want us to look at it from a Christian perspective. Now, one of the things that's come up quite a bit right now is on the character of Charlie Kirk. Was he a good Christian man or was he not? And I know every single person watching this by this point probably has your opinion. I'm going to encourage you and challenge you to actually watch the entirety of the video we're going to show today because you're going to get to hear from somebody who has firsthand accounts of their personal close relationship with Charlie Kirk. I think if you really want to get to the truth of anything, it's good to get back to the original sources. In fact, in a few weeks, you're going to see a episode we have with a historian named Rafael Ortiz, who studies Christopher Columbus, and he's going to talk at length about the importance of going back to original sources so that you don't get everybody's opinion coming in later on. And the more those opinions stack, the more they tend to get away from the original source, which is where the truth usually is. Today is a little bit unique. In fact, I'd say it's a lot unique, really, that a friend of mine and a friend of our church, Dr. Frank Turek, a Christian apologist who travels all over the world doing apologetics, also ministers on campuses all over the world, on university campuses all over the world, answering questions very similar to what Charlie Kirk would do. He is a friend of mine. He's a friend of our church. He's spoken here at Arise before. I fully trust Dr. Frank Turek. Now, I don't know Charlie Kirk personally, but I do know Frank Turek personally, and Frank Turek was a spiritual father in some regards and a mentor, maybe that's a better way of saying it, to Charlie Kirk, and they were actually very, very close. And so I happened to catch Frank putting on his daily podcast, and he did a whole episode about his relationship with Charlie Kirk. And in fact, Frank was right there on the day that he was assassinated, just a few feet from Charlie Kirk. And if you watch the entirety of his video, which I hope you do, I will put it in the show notes so you can see it, link to it, and you can see the entire of the video. If you watch that, the second half of his story is really just the day of, and it's very powerful. It's very intriguing. I think it would be really good for us all to hear. But if you really want to know somebody and who they were, don't listen to what everybody's saying about them. Listen to the people that knew them best. And Frank had a personal relationship, a close relationship with Charlie Kirk. And I think it would be really helpful for all of us to take off our political lenses for a minute and just listen to somebody who knew Charlie personally, who texted with Charlie and called with Charlie and took long walks with Charlie and mentored Charlie in a lot of ways, and hear what he has to say. So that's what we're going to do today. I actually reached out to Dr. Frank Turek and sent him a text and said, hey, could I actually rip your podcast that you made where you talk about it, edit it a little bit for my church and my audience? And he said, absolutely, please do. And so what I did is shortened and only give you the first half where he's talking about his personal experience with Charlie Kirk. And I took out just some little sections where he kind of went on little rants of little things here or there that may not be pertinent to us, just to shorten it down. But I do recommend that you go back and watch the entirety. And again, that will be in the show notes. I've heard people refer to the 7 degrees of separation. Maybe it's 6. I get them confused. But the idea is there that every person on the planet is connected through at least 6 or 7 degrees, people of getting to them. In this case, we are connected to Charlie Kirk through 1 degree. I am personally through Frank Turek. And so we want to take a second, sit back and listen to somebody who knew Charlie Kirk personally and hear some personal stories about Charlie's character and who he was as an individual.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be the most difficult show I have ever done. Many of you know I was with my dear friend Charlie Kirk when he was murdered last week. He was martyred for his bold faith in Christ, and the past 5 days have been the hardest of my life and maybe the hardest in your lives as well. And the pain is proportional to the value of the loss. I see people on the news that are killed every day, and it's sad, but I don't know them, and they don't have an impact on my life. But Charlie had an enormous impact on my life, and I know your life as well. And so the grief that we're feeling is proportional to the greatness of the man. Now, when you say great things about someone who has just died, people think you're just cherry picking the good and ignoring the bad, but I'm telling you, that is not the case here. Of course, Charlie wasn't perfect because none of us are. Only Jesus was. And that's why only Jesus can be the savior that each of us needs. But Charlie had enormous virtues and very few faults. And I'm going to get to them here in a minute, but people often ask me, well, how did you and Charlie ever connect? I didn't reach out to him. Charlie actually reached out to me, and my friend, Dr. John Ferrer, who works with us here at Cross Examine, spontaneously sent me this email just a couple of days ago from Charlie. It came to our ministry on January 18th, 2020. So Charlie was emailing our ministry. And keep in mind, he was 26 years old when he emailed me this. And here's what he said. He said, "Hi, all. I'm trying to get in touch with Frank Turek. He has played a major role in my life and my advocacy. I run the largest student organization in the country, fighting for conservative values, tpusa.com. Here is some info on my work, charliekirk.com. I've watched countless videos of his and want to connect with him. His work has impacted my teaching to the many millions of followers who look to our platform for guidance. Thank you and God bless, Charlie." And then he has his cell phone there. Let me point out, ladies and gentlemen, that you never know who you are going to influence when you put something online, for good or for bad. So Charlie said, "Hey, Frank, I want to come see you." And I wound up going out to see him. We did his podcast. It was maybe, I don't know, if it was maybe a year after we initially met. We had some contact. He was busy. I was busy. I finally went out there. We did his podcast, and he asked me to mentor him, particularly in Christian apologetics. Now, it could be very hard to mentor someone who's smarter than you. And Charlie's way smarter than me. But it wasn't hard to mentor Charlie because his intellect was only surpassed by his humility. I'll explain why here in a minute. In fact, they have a t-shirt that we were given when we met with the social media team, the t-shirt said, "Humility before honor." Humility before honor. So let me relate some of the amazing characteristics of Charlie. Some of them you know, some of them you may not know if you didn't know him personally. First of all, you probably know, number one, and most importantly, he was all about Jesus. I love the fact that he was a 24/7, 365 Christian in every area of his life. I mean, I've been waiting for a leader in the political world to be sold out to Jesus and the gospel. Someone who wouldn't just refer to some sort of generic God up there, but to Jesus, the true God. Someone who knew that politics, while it's not our most important calling, affects our most important calling. And that is to preach the gospel and to make disciples of all nations, because laws that are put into place can actually restrict that ability. And so we have to be engaged. We also have to be engaged to love our neighbors. Charlie knew that to love our neighbors required us to pass laws that protected our neighbors from evil. And that's the number one role of government, to protect innocent people from evil. We talked about that a lot. It's Romans 13. The ruler does not bear the sword for nothing. He's supposed to punish wrongdoers, to keep innocent people protected. And I love that Charlie was someone who believed all that and had the skill and courage to do that on college campuses. Yet Charlie just said recently, this had to be about a month ago, he said recently, politics is peanuts compared to Jesus, unquote. It's important, but it's peanuts compared to Jesus. And he was absolutely right. In fact, donors would come up to Charlie at TPUSA, and some of you already know that TPUSA is over $100 million a year in donations because Charlie and his team are just so effective at what they do. And donors would come up to him and say, hey, Charlie, we love all this conservative stuff, but keep the Jesus stuff out of it. You know what Charlie told him? Give your money to somebody else. Because without Jesus, we're nothing. This is all about Jesus. Politics is an implication of Christianity. It's an implication. It's something we do because Christ saved us. It's something we do because we love our neighbors. But we want to get people saved and sanctified and then be salt and light. And Charlie would send me, and he'd send many of his other friends scriptures, usually about once a week, sometimes more often. Here are a few he sent in the past 3 months. He was a man of peace, and he sent Matthew 5:9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they should be called sons of God. He hated all these foreign wars that we tended to get into, and he wanted to make peace with people who didn't agree with him. That's why he had the open mic. He also sent me one on holiness from easy for me to say, from 1 Peter chapter 1. You shall be holy, for I am holy. And he knew salvation is about grace, not works. He just sent this recently, 2 Timothy 1:9, that Christ saved us and called us to be holy, or saved us to a holy calling, not because of our works, but because of his own purpose and grace, which he gave us in Christ Jesus before the ages began. He was all about grace. In fact, he was asked by a interviewer not long ago, what would you say to someone, or maybe it was actually, it was a student. What would you say to someone who had 90 seconds to live? Check this out. Here it is.
But what would you actually want to tell me if I have 30 seconds left to live?
Boy, you got 30 seconds. In 30 seconds, you're about to meet eternal judgment. And there's only one way that you can get bailed out of that. And it's not all the good things you did or the moral scorecard. It's whether or not you have Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And that's the only thing that's going to matter. And so you got 10 seconds left. You're dying from a gunshot wound. And you ask the question, who is Jesus Christ? And the answer to that singular question, who is Jesus Christ, is the most important question for everyone in the audience. Not how much money you have, not how much good stuff you do. It is, who is Jesus Christ? You might say, oh, Jesus was, a teller of good tales, or Jesus was a good person, or Jesus was a historical figure. None of that's going to cut it. It's whether or not you repent and you ask Christ to come in as your Lord and Savior. That's the only thing that will save you from eternal damnation.
Charlie was all about the gospel. Tragically, he mentioned you had a gunshot wound and you had 30 seconds to live. We'll see a little bit later that even with the gunshot wound, Charlie didn't have 30 seconds to live. When Charlie asked me to help him prepare to answer questions about controversial biblical doctrines, such as, say, the role of women in the church, he wrote this just a week ago. He said, give me answers that are, quote, really biblical. No pandering to the gods of this age, unquote. And he also knew the power and privilege of prayer. A month ago, he wrote me this: please pray for me. I'm under the gun on something right now. Prayers appreciated. So Charlie was all about Jesus. Jesus was the most important aspect of his life. Secondly, only second to Jesus was his family. The family was second only to Jesus. This is last Monday, 2 days before he was murdered. Charlie and I went on one of our evening walks. We would meet during the day, and then he'd go have dinner with the family. And he said, hey, could we go on a walk? Say maybe about 8:30. He said, sure, let's go on a walk. So we did this several times over the summer. Charlie and I were together almost every month. We were together in May, we were together in June, together in early August, and together in September, leading right up to his death. And just about every one of those visits, when I was in Phoenix, he would say, hey, let's go for a walk. So we'd go for like an hour walk, always with a bodyguard right behind us. But it was dark, and he would ask me, what do I say if I get this question? What do I say if I get that question? He knew most of the answers already. He was just looking to fine tune himself. Anyway, when I got to where he lived, I texted him. I said, okay, I'm here. And he said, okay, coming out. And then a minute later, he said, shortly, Gigi just woke up. So he didn't say, hey, Erica, handle Gigi. He did. And then I just waited, which was great. His family should come first. Now, that night, we walked for over an hour. And the top two issues he wanted to talk about the most were the resurrection of Jesus. Because if the resurrection's true, as he and I spoke many times, Christianity's true. Everything just falls into place. If the resurrection's not true, forget it. It's false. And the other thing he wanted to talk about that night was how to convince young people of the importance of marriage and family. You may have seen a recent survey where Trump voters, the men, their number one goal in life was to get married. Women Trump voters, it was like number 5 or 6. For women Harris voters, it was like 12 out of 13. And Charlie wanted people to understand the beauty of marriage. He wanted to show the world how beautiful marriage and family are, and how he was so blessed to have a family with Erica. And so we talked a lot about that. Charlie just tweeted out, speaking of the resurrection, on August 31st. It said, the resurrection of Jesus is a fact of history. It really happened. Jesus rose from the dead. 6.5 million views. By the way, Andrew Colvett, who produces Charlie's show, said leading up to the election last year, Charlie's content got 15 billion views. He was the most important influencer for young people under 30. 15 billion views. Charlie's also devoted to his family, and the one way he did that was to observe the Sabbath. He just wrote a book. It's going to be coming out shortly. He asked me to review it just for theological purposes, and if I had any insights, I reviewed the whole book. It is an excellent book. There's a lot of great theology in it. He gives in there the reasons to think the Sabbath is binding on Christians and reasons to think it isn't. But he says, regardless of that, you ought to obey it. And he explains why it was such a cathartic thing to do for him and his family, to shut his phone off and just spend 24 hours with his family. Look for that book to come out soon. So Charlie was all about Jesus. He was, secondly, all about his family. Number 3, and you know this, it's so inspiring, but I need to say it, Charlie had courage. A few months ago, there was some violent act in the news, and I texted him and I said, I hope you've increased your security detail. He texted me back. He said, quote, I have. I know they want me dead. And I don't know who he meant by they, maybe just radicals on the left. But that didn't stop him from exposing himself to danger. No, look, Charlie didn't really like the word safe. He knew that ministry required you to take risks, just like love requires you to take risks. Sure, you can protect your heart if you don't give it away to anyone else. But if you give it away to someone else, you're risking it being broken. Charlie knew that if he wanted to do ministry, he had to risk himself. So safety was not his top priority. Loving people by highlighting Jesus was his top priority. That required him to expose himself to danger. Now, he did take precautions, obviously. There was a security team there, and I'll get to that here a little bit later. But he thought it was worth the risk to love people where they were on campus. Sure, he could have brought it inside, but when it's inside, you're not going to get as big a crowd as outside, and you're not going to be able to attract people walking by. And Charlie wanted to reach out to the world. Also, he wasn't afraid to be politically incorrect, to say something true that no one else would risk saying, even if it meant his opponents would twist and attempt to smear his reputation. Let me give you an example of this. He rightfully pointed out, now this is saying this in this culture, you're going to get hammered for this, but I think he's right. He rightfully pointed out that although well-intended, the civil rights legislation made us more race-focused rather than less. And I think if you're being fair, it's hard to argue with that. Certainly, segregation was wrong and it needed to be corrected. But you don't correct old racism by introducing new racism. For some of the good that the civil rights legislation brought us, it certainly didn't bring us our goal of a race-neutral society. In fact, Charlie and I were recently talking about the different, people say we're a colorblind society. No, we're not a colorblind society. We never will be a colorblind society, but we should be a color-neutral society. Now, the civil rights legislation certainly in some ways created more division. It did some good things, but it created more division. Charlie made those points, even though he knew people on the left would twist what he said and falsely accuse him of being a racist. So he had courage. Number 4, he was humble. As I said, the only thing that was more impressive than his intellect was his humility. I mean, he would send me videos and ask, how did I do? What would you do differently? What would you say here? What would you say there? And some of his favorite quips, many of them are from the Bible, he would say, a wise man invites correction. Wisdom listens. Pride goes before the fall. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. And if you noticed with Charlie, it was never about him. It was always about the team. Like I'd see something online, I go, man, Charlie, that was great. And he'd go, that's my team. Or he'd put out a tweet and he'd go, I got good people helping me with that. That's my team. He was always putting other people, he's always giving other people the credit. And when you complimented him, it was like he went into aw shucks mode. He was kind of like, he's 6'4", but he would kind of just, go, aw shucks, he kind of get a little bit embarrassed. And later he finally just learned to say, well, thank you. And in fact, Tuesday, just before he died, my wife and Lynn and myself were all at the TPUSA headquarters, and Charlie and I were meeting with some other folks, and we were talking about the questions that he might get the next day at Utah Valley. And when we had a break, I said, hey, come on, I want to introduce you to my wife. He's met Stephanie before, but I want to introduce you to Lynn and everything. And so he comes in the room. It's just me and Lynn and Stephanie. And, they're just complimenting him up and down about how much the team, because they just saw the whole TPUSA operation, and they were just so impressed with how professional these people were and how much enthusiasm they had for what they were doing, and particularly working for Charlie. And he was just, he was in the aw shucks mode. That's what my wife later said. So he was humble. You need humility. That's why he got so good at what he did, because he asked everybody for advice. He had other mentors. It wasn't just me. He had people all around him that would help him to go from great to the greatest at what he did. Also, number 5, he was brilliant and gifted in so many ways. He was really good at everything. Obviously, he was good at leadership. Look what he built. I mean, he comes out of high school. He's 18 years old. And he winds up building TPUSA, which is the greatest grassroots conservative political organization, maybe in the history of the country, for all I know. It certainly is the biggest now. And he's a real good judge of character and talent. Now, a little bit later, I'm going to tell you about some of the talent that Charlie selected when we get to the end of the podcast here about what happened on that terrible Wednesday. And he was really great at connecting with people. The chief of staff of President Trump, Susie Wiles, just said this yesterday when Vice President Vance filled in for the Charlie Kirk show. Susie Wiles said, Charlie never talked at you. He always talked to you, and he listened. Charlie was also a great coalition builder. You know, Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson obviously don't agree on the Israel situation. But Charlie knew that he wanted to keep people like Ben and Mark Levin and Tucker Carlson all under the same tent. He kept a coalition between them for the greater good of the country. He knew that getting 80% of what you wanted was better than getting zero. And in politics, you never get 100% of what you want. So he was really good at keeping people who, if they didn't have somebody like Charlie as the glue between them, might have gone in different directions. He kept them, as Ben Shapiro just said, he kept their ships, our ships, all going in the same direction. He was a coalition builder. He was also a man of action. A couple of months ago, I sent him an article about a clause in the big, beautiful bill that would inadvertently hurt Christian schools. Charlie said, thanks, and he immediately called Senator Rick Scott, and he fixed it. Boom, right away. He turned also into a great apologist. James Lindsay, who was an atheist, but is now kind of an agnostic, tweeted out, or I think he sent to, he put a tweet out and then he sent it to Charlie. And he said, with all this evil in the world, I'm really starting to believe in Satan. And Charlie sent a 4-word response back. Here's what he said. If Satan, then God. And James was blown away because he's absolutely right. If there's evil, there has to be good. Because evil is a lack in a good thing. Evil doesn't exist on its own. It's a privation in good. Evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, you got a better body. What happens if you take all the body out of the cancer? You got nothing. It doesn't exist on its own. Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of a car, you got a better car. What happens if you take all the car out of the rust? You got a Pinto. You got to be old enough to know that joke, but you get the idea. Evil can't exist unless good exists, but good can't exist unless God exists. So if Satan exists, God exists. Charlie also, as everyone has to know, is extremely hardworking. Just before he went to Utah Valley, he took, get this, a 72-hour trip to hit Korea and Japan. This is in the last week of September. In fact, he got back Sunday night, and I flew in Sunday night to meet with him on Monday, Tuesday, and then go to the event on Wednesday. And so I think he left Wednesday night, and I saw that he was doing a Freedom Night in America on that Wednesday night. And Freedom Night in America, I'm like, Charlie, I thought you were heading to Japan. He goes, after Freedom Night. So I texted him. I said, you need to learn how to cram more into each day. And he texted back, I'm working on being less lazy. Well, mission accomplished, ladies and gentlemen. And then, by the way, Andrew just said this, and Charlie told it to me too. When he went to Japan, you know, Japan has very few Christians, but they love Charlie. And he preached the gospel to the leaders and the audience he was meeting with in Japan. He wanted to show them the truth. He was really an evangelist. Again, Jesus was number one. Also, he loved young people and wanted to prepare himself to serve them. Just before he was going on the trip, he texted me, I have 22 hours of flights to Asia. Please send me more to read/prepare. And then he said, I'm really excited. I would love for you to review some of my old footage and would love your thoughts on best ways to proceed. I am taking prep for this tour more seriously than any other prior, unquote. So when he's going in there on Wednesday, he is studied up. Also, Charlie was kind to the students who disagreed with him. I mean, he would always say, hey, people who disagree, if you disagree, come to the front of the line. And of course, that's what true fascists do. They give the microphone to their opponents. Isn't it just incredibly absurd how people label somebody like Charlie a fascist? That this killer really, honestly thought he was a fascist. Ladies and gentlemen, newsflash. Fascists don't give the microphone to their opponents. They kill their opponents. It's madness how deceived people have become, how demonic forces are at work. Let me point out one thing about Charlie and debating young people. He understood, and many other people don't understand this. Most of the time when you're debating someone, you're not going to convince the person you're debating. He or she is too dug into their position. You are there to show grace and truth to someone who is against you in the hope of planting a seed that will flourish later. And maybe more importantly, here's what many don't get. You're there to plant a seed to persuade others who are watching the debate. Lee Strobel famously called this ricochet evangelism, right? You think you're talking to one person, but the people watching are the ones actually being blessed. Greg Kokel, my friend, would say that most evangelism is planting or watering. It's not harvesting. It's gardening. It's not harvesting. It's moving people along. It's planting seeds and watering seeds. It's moving people toward Jesus and away from their old worldview. You don't get them to the foot of the cross in every conversation. And remember, as Charlie understood, when you're answering a question, you're answering a person, not just a question. Also, Charlie was loyal. If two of his friends disagreed, he would never speak ill of them or try and pit one against the other. In 5 years of close contact with Charlie Kirk, and in many private meetings, I never, let me say that again, I never heard Charlie engage in gossip or backstabbing or negative talk that wasn't justified. I mean, if somebody was wrong, he would say that, but he would never gossip or backstab people. Never. Also, he was generous and completely other focused. He asked me to minister to people on his team because he loved them. He invited me just to, look, apologetics is not mainstream. I'm nobody. But he invited me to all the major TPUSA events, including AmFest and the Believer Summit. Charlie trusted me, and he was gracious to me, even though he didn't need to be. Charlie also built people up. He was very complimentary to everybody. Every day I would, for the past month or so, I would send him a one-liner because he liked some of my one-liners I would use on college campuses. Because, look, people would say, what are the hardest questions to answer? And actually, the answer is, not that everyone has all the answers, but most of the questions aren't hard to answer. They're just hard to answer in 2 minutes. That's all the time you have sometimes. So you have to kind of compress things down and put them in pithy sayings. And so I would send him one every day, except on the Sabbath. And one of the ones I sent him recently was, when accused of judging, say this. Why are you judging me for judging? So he writes back, so good. He's got like 20 O's in good with a bunch of exclamation points. He says, you are a true friend. And then he sent me, after we met in August and he wanted me to come back in September, he said, thank you so much for everything. I feel like a real breakthrough has happened. Because we were talking a lot about really tactics on how to answer questions, partially from Greg Kokel's book and partially from some of the things that I've learned. How do you ask a question of the questioner that would expose the assumption that they have? And how can you identify self-defeating statements easily? We worked on that a lot. And so he felt like that was a breakthrough. Finally, let me say this, that Charlie maintained his integrity in the face of temptation. I know this for a fact because I was with him. In August, he got this long text from a donor who gave over $1 million a year to TPUSA, and they were essentially threatening to pull funding because the donor didn't like something Charlie had said on a disputable matter, not an essential matter, but on a disputable matter. But this donor thought it was essential to them. But Charlie wasn't going to give in or compromise for money. And I said to him, Charlie, this is one of the many reasons I love you. You're not going to compromise the truth for money. In fact, on that last walk on Monday night, we talked about the Modesto Manifesto. He hadn't heard of it, but he was doing it anyway. The Modesto Manifesto is something the Billy Graham organization pledged to themselves. The principles of the Billy Graham organization pledged to themselves in Modesto, California, probably in the late 1940s. And they realized there were three things that could tarnish their reputation and put a black eye on the cause of Christ. And those three things are sex, money, and power. So what they agreed to do was to never be in the same room with another woman who was not their wife alone. And of course, Charlie said, yeah, that's the Mike Pence rule. I said, yeah, it's the Mike Pence rule, but he got it from Billy Graham. Remember, I'm twice as old as Charlie. I'm 63 and more than twice as old. He's 31. So we're in different generations. But he already knew the Mike Pence rule. He knew, and he practiced that as well. And the second thing, money. They, at the Billy Graham organization, had other people handle the money. And Charlie does the same thing. He doesn't get involved in that. I mean, he fundraises, but he's not the one handling money. And then power. Power includes pride and reputation. I said the Billy Graham organization would never inflate their numbers. They would never say there were, 100,000 people there if the police said there were 50,000. Whatever the police said, that's what we would say. And Charlie said, that's a good reminder. I don't want to inflate the numbers either. He was already doing the Modesto Manifesto because he was wise beyond his years, even though he didn't call it that. Charlie was focused on Jesus, focused on his family, focused on the mission of bringing people to Christ, of making disciples, and making the country a better place to live. So this leads us up to that terrible Wednesday, September 10th. He sent me this on Tuesday, the day before, and he sent this to other friends too. The passage is from 1 Corinthians 16:9. Paul says, a wide door for effective work has opened up to me, and there are many adversaries. And we found out the next day, one of the adversaries had a 30-odd 6.
Wow. I hope that this podcast today has opened your eyes to at least seeing some behind the scenes stories of what Charlie Kirk was really like as a human being, from firsthand experience from somebody that I trust and I believe you can trust as well. With that being said, I do encourage you to go back and watch the entirety. It's about an hour and 15 minutes long. The entirety of Dr. Frank Turek's show. It's going to be in the show notes here today. You can click that link and go to it if you want to hear all of what he has to say. He really shares powerful account of the day of the assassination, what it was like. He was personally in the car with Charlie Kirk, trying to resuscitate him, doing CPR on him in the car as they went. It's really kind of an unbelievable story. And so I encourage you to go back and watch that as well if you would like to. And as we wrap up this episode today, this special bonus episode, I want to leave you with this because I think this is very valuable. About 2 months before Charlie Kirk was assassinated, somebody asked him in an interview, they said, how would you want to be remembered? And I want you to see this response as we wrap up today. God bless you.
If everything completely goes away, how do you want to be remembered?
I mean, if I die?
Everything just goes away. How would you, if you could be associated with one thing, how would you want to be remembered?
I want to be remembered for courage for my faith. That would be the most important thing. Most important thing is my faith in my life.